My wife demanded a divorce, and the house you can't afford a lawyer to fight. Me, I replied, you're right. She served me papers in court only to see the city's most feared, expensive divorce attorney sit down next to me. He looked at her and said he doesn't have to afford me. I'm his older brother.
She said I couldn't afford a lawyer and tried to take everything, my home, my savings, my dignity. But she never imagined who would walk into that courtroom beside me. Let me take you back to how it all began. The announcement came on an ordinary Tuesday evening in the house I thought would always be ours. I was sitting in the living room, still wearing my work clothes, the faint smell of sawdust clinging to me after another long day teaching woodshop. Victoria Hayes stood across from me, posture stiff, face expressionless. For a moment, I thought she was about to tell me something tragic about her family, maybe bad news from her mother. But when she spoke, her voice was calm, precise, and carried none of the warmth that had once defined our marriage. "Andrew," she said, setting a file folder down on the coffee table between us like a final verdict. "It's over. I want a divorce." The words didn't register at first. I blinked at her, trying to catch some trace of sadness, some flicker of regret in her eyes. There was nothing, just cold certainty, as if she'd rehearsed this moment until there was no hesitation left. "You, what?" My voice cracked, too soft even for me. Victoria leaned back against the couch, arms folded. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. These," she gestured at the folder, "are my terms." I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to. She began listing them out with the same tone she might use for reading off a grocery list. She wanted the house, our house, the one my grandfather had helped me put a down payment on when we first started out. She wanted 70% of our shared savings. And she wanted spousal support for at least 5 years. My throat went dry. 8 years of building this place into a home, every dollar saved, every late night spent sanding floors, repainting walls, patching up the roof, all of it, reduced to a series of demands. She wasn't leaving me. She was gutting me, cutting me out of the very life I thought we had built together. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She filled the silence herself, her tone dripping with condescending pity. "Andrew, let's be realistic. You're a woodshop teacher. You make a decent living, sure, but not the kind that survives in court against someone like me. My lawyer will bury you in legal fees before you even step foot inside a courtroom. It's better for you to accept this now and walk away." The smug little smile that followed twisted the knife deeper. She wasn't afraid of me. She didn't even see me as her partner anymore. Not as the man she once promised forever to. To her, I was an obstacle, one she expected to crush without resistance. The living room, once warm and filled with laughter, felt like a stranger's house. I could see the framed photos on the wall, holidays, birthdays, the two of us smiling in moments I thought were genuine. Now they stared back like mocking ghosts. "Victoria," I started, my voice breaking under the weight pressing on my chest. "After everything, this is how you—" But the look she gave me was sharp, final, like a blade cutting off any plea before it could form. "I don't want to fight about this," she interrupted, smoothing her skirt as if she were dismissing an employee rather than ending a marriage. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her, at the woman I had once believed was my partner, and all I felt was a coldness spreading through me. I had never imagined she could look at me this way, with not just detachment, but superiority. Like she had already won. For a long moment, the silence was unbearable. My heart pounded, every beat a reminder of how completely powerless I was supposed to be. She thought my greatest weakness was that I couldn't afford to fight back. She thought she had cornered me into surrender. I finally drew in a slow, shallow breath. I forced my face into something neutral, let my shoulders sag just slightly. Her eyes narrowed, watching for the break she thought was coming. I let it come. My voice, flat and low, gave her exactly what she wanted to hear. "You're right." The relief on her face was instant, almost radiant. She had expected resistance, maybe a desperate protest. But hearing those words, she relaxed, confident that the humble schoolteacher had given up without a fight. She even smiled, the kind of smug, victorious smile I had never seen on her before. "Good," she said briskly, standing up. "I'm glad you're being sensible about this. You'll be served with the official papers next week." She picked up her handbag, adjusted her jacket, and walked out of the room with the calm certainty of someone leaving a successful business deal. The door closed behind her with a dull thud that echoed in my chest. I sat there, staring at the folder she had left on the table, untouched. My hands trembled, but not with anger, at least, not yet. It was something colder, heavier. I felt hollow, as if the life we had built had been ripped away in an instant. I was left alone in the silence, surrounded by the remnants of what I thought was a marriage. The house felt different now. Foreign, like it already belonged to someone else. And in that moment, I wasn't just shocked. I wasn't just hurt. I was small, insignificant, reduced to nothing more than a man who couldn't fight back. At least, that's what she believed. The days after Victoria Hayes told me she wanted a divorce blurred into a haze of despair. I went through the motions at school, standing in front of my students, explaining how to smooth the edge of a board or how to join dovetail corners. But my voice sounded hollow even to myself. And when I came home, the silence in the house wrapped around me like a shroud. The place that had once been alive with laughter and conversation now felt like a mausoleum where only her words echoed. You can't afford a real lawyer. She was right, or at least that's what I believed as I sat in the dim light of our kitchen, staring at the unpaid bills and the folder of demands she had left behind. For 3 nights, I hardly slept, waking drenched in sweat, convinced that by the end of this I would lose the house my grandfather had helped me buy, the savings I had worked so hard to build, and even the fragments of pride I had left. On the 4th day, I realized that the only name I hadn't let myself consider kept surfacing in my mind no matter how hard I tried to push it away. Jonathan Carter, my older brother. Everyone knew who Jonathan was. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was the lawyer, the most feared divorce attorney in the state, a man who could turn a courtroom into a battlefield and walk away with victory before his opponent even realized the fight had begun. His reputation was legend, his presence alone enough to unsettle other attorneys, and he was my blood. But he hadn't been my brother. Not really, for 5 years. The memory of our last fight was carved deep into me. After our parents died, we stood in the living room of their old house, surrounded by their photographs and furniture, 2 men grieving in completely different ways. I wanted to keep the house, to preserve it as a living memory of them, a place for our families to gather in years to come. Jonathan, ever pragmatic, ever ruthless, insisted we sell. It's an illiquid asset, he argued, his voice sharp with logic. We divide the money and move on. I refused, clinging to the sentimental value, and the argument exploded into something irreparable. We walked away that night and never spoke again. Pride kept us silent through birthdays, holidays, and even funerals. And now pride stood in my throat like a stone, because calling him meant admitting I was wrong to let the rift widen all these years. It meant exposing my weakness, my desperation. But what other choice did I have? I couldn't outspend Victoria. I couldn't outmaneuver her lawyer. If I didn't call him, I would lose everything. My hand shook as I scrolled through my phone to the number I had never erased but never dialed. My thumb hovered over the screen while my heart pounded in my chest. What if he didn't answer? What if he hung up the moment he heard my voice? What if he told me I had made my bed, and now had to lie in it? Swallowing hard, I pressed call. It rang once, twice, and just when I braced myself for voicemail, I heard it. That deep, steady voice I hadn't heard in half a decade. This is Jonathan Carter. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat locked, my chest constricted, and I almost hung up. Somehow I croaked out, "Jonathan, it's me, it's Andrew." The line went quiet, and I thought maybe he had disconnected, but then he spoke again, softer this time, carrying the weight of memory. "Andy?" The nickname hit me harder than I expected. "Yeah," I whispered. "It's me." Another pause, then his voice shifted into something I hadn't heard in years, concern. "What's wrong?" That simple question undid me. The words poured out before I could stop them. I told him about Victoria's cold announcement, about the file she had dropped on the table, about the house, the savings, the spousal support, about the sneer in her voice when she told me I couldn't afford a real lawyer. I told him I felt cornered, humiliated, stripped of any chance to fight back. The silence that followed was heavy, but this time it didn't feel like rejection. It felt like something building. Finally, Jonathan's voice came back, low and dangerous. "She said you couldn't afford a lawyer?" "Yes," I murmured. Those were her exact words. He inhaled slowly, and when he spoke again, the steel in his tone was unmistakable. "Okay. When and where is the first court appearance?" My heart stumbled over itself as I answered, "Next Tuesday, downtown courthouse." His reply was immediate, decisive. "I'll clear my schedule. Don't talk to her. Don't talk to her lawyer. Don't sign a damn thing. Just show up on Tuesday. I'll be there." Before I could respond, the line clicked dead. He had hung up, but not before planting something in me I hadn't felt in days. Hope. I lowered the phone, staring at it as my hands trembled, but the trembling wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the sudden realization that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. I had swallowed my pride, and on the other end of the line my brother had answered, not as the estranged man I had been at odds with for 5 years, but as the protective older brother I remembered from childhood. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I could breathe again. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived gray and soaked with rain, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones and makes every step heavier. And as I walked up the courthouse steps with my old briefcase in hand, I felt the weight of defeat pressing harder than the drizzle that soaked through my jacket. Because in my mind, this was not a day for victory. This was a day to face humiliation. Inside the courtroom, the air smelled of damp paper and stale anxiety, and when I entered, I immediately saw Victoria Hayes seated at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a dark blue power suit, her hair perfect, her posture radiating smug confidence, and beside her was Stephen Grant, her lawyer, a man in his 50s with a smirk so practiced it looked carved into his face. They leaned toward each other, whispering and chuckling like two predators confident the prey had already been cornered, and when Victoria caught sight of me, her smile faltered for just a moment, before turning into a look of pity, as though she were watching a condemned man shuffle toward the gallows. My stomach knotted, and I forced myself toward the defendant's table, sat down, placed my worn briefcase on the surface, and folded my hands to hide the tremor. Stephen Grant stood up and swaggered over, his cologne sharp, his tone dripping with superiority. "Mr. Lawson," he said, drawing out the name as if it were something unpleasant on his tongue, "I trust you've had the chance to review my client's very generous proposal. If you're prepared to sign today, we can make this quick and painless." I swallowed, kept my voice level though it shook inside me, and answered, "I'm waiting for my counsel." He chuckled, a low condescending sound. "Your counsel? Good luck with that." Then he turned back to Victoria, shaking his head as if to share the joke. My palms were sweating, my chest tight, and when the bailiff, Officer Bennett, called the court to order, I thought my heart might break through my ribs. Judge Margaret Collins entered, stern-faced, commanding the room with a glance as she took her seat. "Case of Hayes versus Lawson," she announced. "Are both parties present and represented?" Stephen Grant rose smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor, Stephen Grant representing the plaintiff, Mrs. Victoria Hayes." The judge's eyes shifted to me. I opened my mouth to speak, but before a sound left my lips, the heavy courtroom doors swung open with a thunderous crash that silenced every whisper. All heads turned as Jonathan Carter strode in. My brother. He wasn't just wearing a suit. He was wrapped in something closer to armor, dark as midnight, tailored to perfection, his presence filling the space like a storm front. He moved down the aisle with the predatory grace of a panther, each step measured, his leather briefcase gleaming, and I saw the ripple of recognition spread through the room as attorneys leaned toward one another, murmuring his name. Jonathan Carter. The most feared divorce lawyer in the state. He didn't glance left or right. His eyes were locked on me, and when he reached my table, he placed a firm hand on my shoulder, gave it a gentle squeeze, then sat down beside me with the quiet authority of a general taking command. He set his briefcase on the table with a solid click that echoed like a gavel, and in that sound the atmosphere shifted. I glanced at Victoria, and for the first time since this nightmare began, her mask cracked. Her smugness evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief, her mouth slightly open as if she had just seen a ghost. Stephen Grant looked even worse, the color draining from his face, his smirk gone, replaced with a nervous twitch at his jaw. Jonathan leaned toward me, his voice low and calm. Sorry I'm late, little brother. Traffic was hell. My throat tightened, tears threatening, but I managed the faintest nod. Then he straightened, his expression all business, and addressed the judge with a baritone that carried across the room. Jonathan Carter, Your Honor, representing the defendant, Mr. Andrew Lawson. Judge Collins's eyebrows rose, her tone betraying recognition. Mr. Carter. She knew his reputation, everyone did. Jonathan then turned his head deliberately toward Victoria and Stephen, his gaze cold, his smile sharper than a knife. My apologies for the delay, he said, his voice silk over steel. But there is one clarification that needs to be made. He looked at them both, savoring the silence, then delivered the line that shattered the smug certainty they had walked in with. He doesn't have to afford me. I'm his older brother. The words hit the room like a detonation. A murmur surged through the spectators and the other attorneys, and I felt something ignite inside me. A fire that had been extinguished days ago, suddenly flaring back to life. Victoria looked stricken. Stephen's lips moved soundlessly as though scrambling for a response. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I sat taller. No longer the defeated teacher they thought I was. In that instant, the balance of power flipped completely, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. From the moment Jonathan Carter took his seat beside me in that courtroom, the entire landscape of this divorce shifted, and what followed in the weeks ahead was nothing short of a war. Jonathan didn't simply defend me. He launched a counterattack with precision so ruthless it made my head spin. He filed immediate motions rejecting every single one of Victoria Hayes's demands, declaring them predatory and filed in bad faith. Then submitted a request for full forensic discovery of all financial records for the past 5 years, every bank statement, every credit card bill, every Venmo transfer, every hidden account. And when Stephen Grant tried to object that it was excessive, Judge Margaret Collins barely glanced at his arguments before approving Jonathan's motion in full. The fear on Victoria's face that day was the first crack in her armor, and it fueled the fire that had been building in me since the night she told me I couldn't afford a lawyer. Days turned into weeks, and I watched with a mixture of awe and nervous anticipation as Jonathan's team of forensic accountants dissected Victoria's finances with the precision of surgeons. What began as a stack of statements quickly unraveled into a web of deception. There were charges to luxury hotels, high-end jewelry boutiques, and extravagant dinners for two, all tied to a credit card I had never even known existed, a card linked to our joint savings account. I sat across from Jonathan one evening as he laid out the findings, his eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. She thought she was clever, he said, tapping a receipt from a wine country resort. But clever doesn't hold up against evidence. My fists clenched, the anger rising in me so sharply I could hardly breathe. All those nights she told me she was at conferences, all those weekends she said she was visiting family, lies, every one of them. The depositions came next. And that's where Jonathan's brilliance shone brightest. He scheduled one with Sophie Turner, Victoria's closest friend, a woman who had always been polite but distant toward me. I sat quietly at the table, my heart hammering as Jonathan questioned her with a polite, almost charming tone that masked the trap he was laying. For hours he asked about Victoria's spending habits, her work trips, her general state of happiness, and Sophie tried to dodge and deflect, her loyalty to Victoria plain. But then, Jonathan dropped the question like a guillotine. Miss Turner, can you tell me about Richard Hale? I saw Sophie flinch, the name clearly striking a nerve. My breath caught in my throat. I had never heard it before. Jonathan leaned back casually as if he had all the time in the world. No? Perhaps this will refresh your memory. He slid across copies of the credit card statements, pointing to dates and charges that coincided perfectly with the times Victoria claimed to be away for work. These hotel rooms, these dinners, this jewelry, were you with her? Sophie's eyes darted, her hands twisting in her lap. Finally, under oath, she broke. Her voice trembled as she admitted that Richard Hale was not just a name but a man, a wealthy real estate developer Victoria had been seeing for 1.5 years. She admitted she had covered for her, repeated her lies, told me the conferences were real when she knew they weren't. I felt sick, fury churning in me so violently I thought I might explode right there, but beneath it all a dark sense of satisfaction began to grow. The truth was clawing its way into the light. The deposition of Richard Hale himself was the final blow. He came in smug, dressed in an expensive suit, radiating arrogance. He leaned back in his chair as if the whole process was beneath him. But Jonathan had no intention of letting him off easy. For hours, Jonathan dismantled him piece by piece, questioning his relationship with Victoria, his knowledge of her marriage, his role in her financial decisions. Richard smirked, tried to play it cool, until Jonathan dropped the receipts, the hotel bookings, the transfers, the gifts purchased with my money. "Mr. Hale," Jonathan said, his voice low and deliberate, "these funds came directly from marital assets. Did you instruct Mrs. Hayes to demand spousal support and the house because you believed Mr. Lawson could not afford to fight back?" For the first time, Richard's smugness faltered. He shifted, hesitated, then under oath admitted it. Yes, they had planned it together. Yes, it was his idea for her to go after everything, because in his words, Andrew Lawson is just a woodshop teacher. Hearing my name spoken like that, hearing the disdain, the contempt, the way they had conspired to strip me of everything I had, sent a wave of rage through me, so intense I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. But then the satisfaction hit just as hard, because Richard Hale had admitted it, under oath, in front of lawyers and a court reporter, and there was no taking it back. When we walked out of that room, Jonathan placed a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "It's over for them. They just don't know it yet." I nodded, my chest heaving, the fury still simmering but tempered now with something else: relief. The mask had been ripped away. Victoria Hayes was no longer the poised, confident woman who thought she could bury me. She was exposed, a liar, a thief, and a fraud. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a deep, undeniable satisfaction. She had underestimated me, underestimated the bond I had with my brother, and now her entire scheme was collapsing around her. 6 months after that first stormy day in court, I sat in the same courtroom, but this time the air felt different. There was no dread pressing down on me, no tightness in my chest. Instead, I felt a strange calm, almost anticipation, because I knew how this story would end. The evidence Jonathan Carter had assembled was overwhelming. The financial records showing thousands siphoned from our joint account, the receipts from hotels and jewelry stores, the testimony of Sophie Turner admitting to covering for her friend, and the smug but damning confession of Richard Hale himself. Victoria Hayes's carefully constructed facade had crumbled into dust, and what remained was a picture of betrayal, greed, and fraud. Judge Margaret Collins entered, her expression stern as always, and as she called the case to order, I glanced at Victoria across the room. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had walked into this courtroom months ago in her tailored power suit. Her shoulders were hunched, her hair pulled back too tightly, as if to disguise how tired she looked, her eyes darting nervously between me and her lawyer Stephen Grant, who himself looked worn down, beaten before the gavel even fell. When Jonathan rose to present our final terms, his voice steady and commanding, I felt a rush of satisfaction that nearly made me smile. "Your Honor," he began, "given the overwhelming evidence of infidelity, fraud, and misuse of marital funds, we request that Mrs. Hayes forfeit all claims to the marital home, relinquish her demand for spousal support, and reimburse Mr. Lawson for the $60,000 she misappropriated to fund her affair." The words hung in the air like a blade, sharp and final. Stephen Grant tried to protest, his voice rising in desperation. "Your Honor, these terms are punitive. Surely we can negotiate." Judge Collins cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Mr. Grant, the evidence speaks for itself. Your client has committed perjury, concealed assets, and violated marital fiduciary duties. These terms are more than fair." She turned her gaze on Victoria, her voice clipped. "Do you understand that you are accepting these conditions?" Victoria's lips trembled, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." Watching her mutter those words, watching the last ounce of arrogance drain from her face, I felt a satisfaction so profound it settled deep into my bones. This was the same woman who had looked me in the eye and told me I was too weak, too poor, too insignificant to fight her. Now she was being stripped of everything she had tried to steal. Forced to walk away, not just empty-handed, but owing me money. When the gavel came down, the rush inside me was almost intoxicating. Jonathan leaned closer, whispering so only I could hear. "It's done. She has nothing left." I nodded, my throat thick with the release of a tension I hadn't even realized I was still holding. Across the aisle, Stephen Grant gathered his papers without looking at Victoria, his face pale with humiliation. Victoria sat frozen, staring down at the table as though refusing to meet anyone's eyes. For a moment I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered her smirk that night in our living room, the condescending way she told me I couldn't afford a lawyer. And the pity evaporated. The fallout came quickly and brutally. Word of the case spread, and with it the details of her betrayal. Friends who had once surrounded her at parties began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Some of them had been dragged into depositions, forced under oath to admit uncomfortable truths, and they wanted nothing more to do with her. I heard through whispers that her colleagues at work no longer trusted her, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. And Richard Hale, the man she had gambled everything on, abandoned her almost immediately. He had no interest in a woman publicly branded as a liar and a fraud, a woman who had lost spectacularly in court. He was drawn to success, to power, and she was now the opposite, a cautionary tale. I won't deny the satisfaction I felt watching it all unravel. I had imagined this moment in the darkest nights, fantasized about her downfall, and now that it was real, the emotion that filled me was not just relief but something sharper, almost glee. When I told Jonathan, he only nodded. "She wrote her own ending, Andy. You just had to let her play it out." One afternoon, not long after the judgment, I walked past Victoria in the courthouse hallway as she left Stephen Grant's office. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, clutching a stack of papers in her hands like a lifeline. Her eyes met mine for the briefest second, and in them I saw none of the triumph she once wore, only exhaustion and shame. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. I simply nodded, calm, steady, and walked past her. For the first time, I felt truly free. All the anger, all the humiliation, all the weight I had carried since the night she told me it was over, it lifted. The satisfaction wasn't just in winning or watching her fall. It was in knowing she no longer had power over me, no longer had the ability to define me as weak or helpless. She had underestimated me, underestimated my family, and she had paid the price. And in that release, that final breath of freedom, I realized I had regained more than just my house or my savings. I had regained myself. The final court hearing ended with the bang of Judge Margaret Collins's gavel. And just like that, the storm was over. Victoria Hayes walked away stripped of the house, denied spousal support, ordered to repay the $60,000 she had siphoned into her affair with Richard Hale. Her lawyer, Stephen Grant, looked like a man who had been chewed up and spit out, pale and exhausted. And when Officer Bennett escorted them from the courtroom, I knew their fight was finished. Sitting beside me, Jonathan Carter closed his briefcase with a crisp snap, his expression unreadable, but his presence still radiating the authority that had carried me through the darkest battle of my life. I felt an immense calm wash over me, a peace I hadn't known in months, and yet beneath that calm was something deeper, something more personal than victory in court. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about my brother. A week later, Jonathan called me. His voice was quieter than I remembered, lacking the sharp edge he often carried in court. "Meet me at the old place," he said. "You know the one." My chest tightened. He meant our parents' house, the place that had driven the wedge between us 5 years ago. I drove out on a Saturday afternoon, the sky clear, the air cool, and when I pulled up the gravel drive, I saw him sitting on the porch steps, his elbows on his knees, looking not like the feared attorney who had torn apart Victoria's case, but like the brother I had grown up with. For a moment, I just stood there, taking in the sight, the house looming behind him with its peeling paint and sagging gutters. It had been neglected during our years of silence, left as another casualty of our stubborn pride. Jonathan looked up and gave me a small nod. "Andy." I sat down beside him, and for a while we said nothing. The silence wasn't heavy like it used to be. It felt tentative, almost fragile, like a truce waiting to be spoken aloud. Finally, he exhaled and said, "I was wrong." I turned to him, startled. He was staring out across the yard, his jaw tight but his voice steady. Back then, I was so focused on turning everything into numbers, into assets. I forgot what this house really was. I forgot what it meant to you, what it meant to both of us. His admission hit me harder than any victory in court. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to respond. I was wrong too. I held on so tightly to the past that I couldn't see another way forward. I let my pride get in the way, and I let it cost me my brother. We sat there in the fading light, two grown men who had once thrown fists over this very yard, now quietly admitting what neither of us had been able to say for years. After a long pause, Jonathan stood, brushing the dust from his hands. "So, what do you say we fix it up?" I blinked at him. "Fix it up?" He nodded toward the porch railing, half-rotted and sagging. "This place is still ours. It doesn't have to be a monument to the past. It can be something for the future, for both of us." And so we began. Over the next several weekends, we worked side by side, just like we used to when Dad made us help with repairs. We replaced the porch boards, patched the roof, painted the siding. Jonathan, the man who lived in courtrooms and wore $1,000 suits, rolled up his sleeves and hammered nails, his shirt damp with sweat, his laughter breaking through at moments that reminded me of the boy I once knew. "Remember when Dad tried to fix the sink and flooded the whole kitchen?" he said one afternoon, chuckling. I grinned, the memory surfacing like a warm current. "Yeah, and Mom made that apple pie the same day, said it was to sweeten the disaster." Those moments healed something in me that the court never could. Every laugh, every shared memory sanded away the bitterness of the years apart. I realized then that Victoria's betrayal, as devastating as it had been, had forced me to reach across the divide I had built with my brother. She thought she was isolating me, cutting me down to nothing. Instead, she had unknowingly given me back the most important piece of my life. One evening, as we stood back to look at the freshly painted house glowing in the sunset, Jonathan put a hand on my shoulder. "You know, Andy, she tried to take everything from you. But in the end, she gave you back your family." I swallowed hard, the truth of it sinking deep. "Yeah," I said quietly, "and that's worth more than any house or any savings account." As the light faded, I felt a warmth settle inside me. A peace that came not from winning in court, but from knowing I hadn't lost what mattered most. Victoria Hayes had underestimated me, had tried to destroy me, but her greed had forced me to reconcile with my brother, to reclaim not just my home, but my family. And as Jonathan and I packed up the tools, the sound of our laughter echoing across the yard, I realized the real victory wasn't in what I had kept. It was in what I had regained. In the end, betrayal became the fire that revealed truth, and pride gave way to reconciliation. Victoria Hayes thought she could break me, yet her greed restored what mattered most, my family. Sometimes life's cruelest cuts carve the path back to love, strength, and what we should never take for granted. And now, we've pinned a few powerful questions in the comments below. Ask yourself, what would you do? A, B, C, or D? Your answer might just speak for someone else. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.
After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind, or maybe it has brought back some old memories. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories, and they connect all of us. Everyone has their own unique journey in life, and we all try to understand the world in our own way. These kinds of moments remind us that we are all human, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and always learning something new. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with your friends. Your thoughts and feedback are always valuable to us, as they motivate us to create even better content. Every story has its own unique angle, and our goal is to understand everyone's perspective and make our content diverse and relatable. Stories like these help us realize that life's journey is different for everyone, and by hearing other stories, we learn something new. You can also share your own stories with us. Your experiences are valuable to us as well, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave your feedback. We aim to create content that brightens your mind and gives you new ideas every time. If you've already seen this video before, your feedback is still important. With every piece of feedback, we can improve our content and bring a new perspective to our viewers. Today, what we saw was just a small part of the many stories shared on Reddit and across the world. It's a reminder of how we all try to understand life by sharing our experiences with each other. This video was only an example of how we try to connect with others through storytelling, learning about different sides of life. We hope to continue sharing such stories that help us all learn and grow together. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon. If you haven't already, please like and follow for more amazing content. Your support keeps us going, and we will strive to bring you more thought-provoking and heartwarming stories. Until next time, take care and stay curious. **